So first I want to look at a passage out of 2 Corinthians written by the Apostle Paul. In 2 Corinthians, Paul says, 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep. I have been on frequent journeys, in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, and dangers from Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among false brethren. I've been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. That there is a risk, a list of all the risks and threats that the Apostle Paul faced as he went out. None of those risks stopped him from going, but he faced them and encountered them. Likewise, when we send people out, we face a variety of risks. Paul lists several types. He lists security threats from governments, organized religion from societies in general. He lists social threats from his culture, from other cultures, from urban environments. He lists safety threats of physical harm, travel difficulties, and natural disasters. He looked at those and went anyway. Brothers and sisters, just because there's risk in the world does not mean we don't go and take the name of our God around the world. But it does change how we do it. We do have to prepare to face those risks, and we need to respond to them. Continuing on in John and Acts, we have some resolutions to risk here for us. In John 11, it reads this. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life, speaking of Jesus. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the people of Judea. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. Now, this passage occurs in Scripture just after the resurrection of Lazarus, and the Jewish leaders didn't like that, and they didn't like the ministry of Jesus, and they decided they wanted to kill him. So Jesus faced that risk, and he decided the thing that I need to do in face of that risk is to withdraw and go someplace else. So that's a viable option. Sometimes there's a risk that is so great that you don't go and you leave. But that's not the only solution we see. We see lots in Acts from Paul. In Acts 9, 22 and 25, we read, Yet Saul, Paul, grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Messiah. After many days had gone by, there was a conspiracy among the Jews to kill him, but Saul learned of their plan. Day and night they kept close watch on the city gates in order to kill him. But Paul's followers took him by night and lowered him in a basket through an opening in the wall. So here Paul also faces the threat of death due to his ministry. But Paul and his followers take a different approach. They sit and watch and see kind of how things develop. And they reach a point where they decide, yes, the best thing we need to do is to leave. So they lower him over the wall and he leaves. In Acts 12, 1 and 2, I won't read it. James and Peter face threat of execution by the government. We see that James is martyred and Peter's imprisoned in that passage. So sometimes when you face a risk, you may end up in jail or you may end up dead. Just kind of depends. In Acts 13, 15, 51, Jewish leaders used human assets to harass Paul, who leaves all he had done at the time. That passage reads, But the Jewish leaders incited the God-fearing women of high standing and the leading men of the city. They stirred up persecution against Paul and Barnabas and expelled them from their region. So they shook the dust off their feet as a warning to them and went to Iconium. Sometimes when you face risk, you say, you know what? If that's how you want to respond, God bless you, we're leaving. And you go off and devote your energies and ministry efforts in some other way, in some other place. And you let God deal with them. That is an acceptable way to deal with risk. Lastly, in Acts 17, 13 and 14, But when the Jews in Thessalonica learned that Paul was preaching the word of God at Berea, some of them went there too, agitating the crowds and stirring them up. The believers immediately sent Paul to the coast, but Silas and Timothy stayed at Berea. In this case, the ministry decided that our public face of the ministry needs to leave. But we'll leave a team there to continue the work. So sometimes if, the team on the ground decided that Scott Stewart needed to leave as the public face of the ministry, but we're going to leave the other workers there to continue on the work. I just picked on you because I know you. It's dangerous if you're a friend of mine and I'm speaking. You might get called out. So that's just a very brief, non-comprehensive summary of some of the theology or the risk management ideas we see in Scripture. So we can have there is a biblical basis for the work that we do, for looking at risks and making decisions on them. The next idea that I want to talk about is one that has become new to me relatively, and that's this idea of duty of care. There are two types of duty of care. The first is moral. As believers and church workers, we have a moral obligation to protect the people that God has entrusted to us. It is the lives of people that truly are the most valuable asset that our churches have. So we have a moral obligation to protect those assets by watching out for them. The other idea I want to talk about is this legal duty of care. This particular definition is taken out of a white paper printed by the European Intra-Agency Security Forum discussing a particular court case that I'll speak to. First, the definition. Duty of care is the adherence to a standard of reasonable care while performing acts that present a reasonable, foreseeable risk of harm to others. So if we know there's a risk and we can identify and predict the risk and warn people about it, we are legally liable and responsible to make sure that we have communicated it. This particular review is a discussion of the Dennis v. Norwegian Refugee Council court case from 2012. In June of 2012, Steve Dennis, an employee of the NRC, was injured and kidnapped along with 3 other colleagues while on a VIP tour of a refugee camp in Kenya. 4 days after kidnapping, the hostages were released during an armed rescue operation carried out by Kenyan authorities and local militia. 3 years later, Dennis sued the NRC, his former employee, for compensation for economic and non-economic loss following the kidnapping. The court concluded that the NRC acted with gross negligence in relation to this incident and found the NRC to be liable for compensation towards Dennis and awarded him $500,000. The court said, NRC, you should have known the risk. You should have prepared for the risk, addressed the risk, mitigated the risk. Because you didn't, you owe him $500,000. And that's a very broad, duty of care is a very broad idea. But it's something that we have to give thought to in our litigious culture. In addition, our churches, our culture, our greater culture is becoming increasingly secular. And it's very easy for me to conceive of a day that we have a first-generation believer that we are sending out on the mission field who has something happen to them, and his non-believing family decides to sue the church because we did not adequately identify and notify of the risk. That I have been known to lose sleep over that idea. It's something that we have to think about and need to deal with. Duty of care. These next 3 slides are taken from the riveting bedtime reading of Duty of Care and Travel Risk Management Global Benchmarking Study by International SOS. If you are an insomniac, I encourage you to find this white paper and read it. But it does really contain some good content. And you will get a copy of all of my presentation. I prepared it knowing that you would. So, you don't have to take pictures. You'll get it. So I'll actually since you're going to get these, I'll move through these pretty quickly because the white paper does a really good job of explaining what all of these ideas are. First, though, all countries have risk. They're different. but they all have risk. Gone are the days where we had safe countries and non-safe countries. All countries have risk. When I was short-term missions coordinator here at the church, I had a team on the ground in Nice, France in 2016 when the truck drove down the promenade on Bastille Day. We have our largest field team, long-termers living in Nice. They have about 20 people there, between wives and children and workers. And we had a short-term team about that same size. My godchildren were there. Some of my dearest friends, longest-term believing friends, were all on that team, and all decided not to go down to the sea to the fireworks. A friend of mine in the church in Nice had gone. Mitch said he was on the street. He turned around to walk back home, heard this noise, turned around to see the truck drive right over where he had just been. If my teams had been there, I would have lost 40 of my closest friends. And the people that are my son's godparents. So these risks are real. And they occur in places that traditionally we have not thought twice about. So we have to give thought to it. Different organizations face unique risks, and they all differ in how they cope with similar risks. Different organizations have different cultures that have different risk aversion and risk comfort. So they're just going to deal with those differently. Duty of care is not just about natural and human disasters. It's not just about responding to the typhoon. It's not just about responding to the truck. It's really thinking about your people, preparing them to be resilient, and providing them aftercare when something happens. More organizations are becoming aware of duty of care responsibilities. There are generally about 5 primary stakeholders in the duty of care world. HR, security, risk management, senior management, your travel department. If you're like us, those 5 roles are held by 2 different people here at the church. Sometimes, some organizations, you're all 5 of those. That doesn't change anything. That just means those 5 people need to be at the table. And while those 5 people have primary responsibility, truly duty of care is everybody's job. Just today, I had a facilities worker point out a child safety risk that we have here on the property that I was not aware about. I'm also responsible for child safety, meaning Ministry Safe and Greg Love's World here at the church. I'm grateful that my custodian pointed that out so that I can address that, but it's everybody's responsibility. If you talk to different organizations, you're going to have a very wide range of duty of care practices, and that's okay, but everybody needs to have some. Company size, this obviously was written not with the church in mind, but company size matters most in duty of care, but company culture also plays a role. You can be a really large organization, but really stink at duty of care because you've not thought about it at all. Conversely, some of the smallest missionary agencies that I know provide the most outstanding duty of care because the organization values that, thinks about it, and works for everybody to be a part of it. Most organizations, including my own, fail to plan to implement a global duty of care strategy. 3 years ago, when I was in the missions office, doing short-term missions travel planning, duty of care was not on my radar. Since I moved over to my role in safety and security, it's gotten on my radar. I talk about it, I think about it a lot, and hopefully we're changing some of that culture. It is primarily a Western concept. If you talk to folks in India or China, they're really not it's not gonna be in their paradigm. But that doesn't leave us of the responsibility because we are operating in the United States and our culture expects it. Corporate social responsibility is the main motivator generally for duty of care. In our case, it's the Great Commission and the Great Commandment to love people and to take care of the people God's entrusted to us. That should be our motivator for duty of care. The next slide gives you 10 best practices. Increase awareness, tell people the risks when they go, plan with key stakeholders, make sure that you're looping in HR, your elders, your deacons, your risk management folks, make sure they're all on the same page. Expand your policies and procedures. When I moved over to missions, we had policies and procedures for duty of care, but they were in an 11-point font, half-inch margin, single-spaced font, 3,500 pages, not really 3,500, but a really dense small print book that nobody read and nobody knew what it said. Today we have much leaner policies. All of our policies are designed to fit on one page at maximum, if at all possible. But I mean, we've grown, we've condensed, but we've also broadened because they're better policies than they used to be. Conduct due diligence. Do your homework. If you're going to Burkina Faso, read about Burkina Faso in the news, follow Stick and see if he's done anything on it. Concilium can help you with it. State Department can help you with that. But do your due diligence. Communicate, educate, and train. If you're sending a team, communicate the risks, teach them how to deal with them, and train them again on those things. Assess risk prior to every trip. It doesn't matter if this is your 15th trip in the last 2 years to a country. You need to assess the risk every time because risk is dynamic and changes. Just continually updated. Track travelers at all times. Always know where your people are. Several years ago, I had a team in Romania that had their flight canceled, and instead of everybody getting home departing Romania Sunday at 7 a.m. and getting to the DFW at 6 p.m. on Sunday, I had my team of 20 strung out across the next 2.5 days in pockets of 1s, 3s, 5s, 7s. I had to book hotels by the airport for a team. I had to deal with an airline arrangement, people getting lost, luggage getting lost, but I always knew where they were. Make sure that you have policies and practices in place so you know where your people are. Implement an emergency response system. I spoke of the Bastille Day attack. When that attack occurred, we had trained our folks to communicate if something like that happened. I got a phone call from the team leader, a friend of mine, said, "Joe, you're going to hear about a truck driving down the street in France on the news real soon. I want you to know we're all okay." Well, when Jake told me that, I pictured the news stories I heard recently about a man driving into the crowd at a homecoming parade in Oklahoma. Little did I know I was going to be reading about the Bastille Day attack and that particular terrorist activity. But our emergency response system worked. He called me. I was able to proactively email all of the emergency contacts of the team, as well as our elders and missions management, and tell them, "You're going to hear this. I want you to know all of our people are okay." None of them were there. Implement additional management controls. Make sure that your practices are following your policies. We have a former elder here who is an attorney who said, "The worst thing you can do, or the best thing you can do for me as a litigation attorney, is have a policy that I can prove that you're not following." Because that's the difference between negligence and gross negligence and about $2 million. So you need to have management controls in place that are evaluating your policies and your practices. Last, ensure your vendors are aligned. If you're contracting with a variety of people to meet your needs, like an insurance carrier for short-term travel, a different company that's helping you address kidnapping crises, you're a travel agent, make sure all of those people's policies are in agreement with your goals and culture as an organization, and make sure that there aren't any pockets and holes in coverage. Just make sure those are aligned. Now this next slide is an integrated duty of care model. Assess your specific risk. Know where you're going and what the problems are there. Learn the health, safety, and security risks of the field you're working in. You need to plan strategically. Be intentional about your duty of care and crisis management plans. Develop good policies and procedures. Manage global mobility. Know what the airline they're flying on, the route they're flying. Know what taxi driver or driver is picking them up. Just don't leave a team to randomly pick their own airline and just go hail a cab at 10 o'clock at night in Nairobi when they land. You need to make sure that they have a driver from the hotel who's meeting them with a sign, and make sure they have the right name. I'm William Joseph Calfee. I'm Joe. Have been for 48, almost 9 years. Walked out of the airport in Nairobi at 10 o'clock at night. Did not see a sign. After everybody else was gone, I finally saw the sign that said William. I'm like, oh, that's me. You're here for me. Okay. That's really not germane. It's just a fun story about my stupidity. Where was I? Communicate, educate, and train. We've talked about some. Track and inform. Know where your people are at all times. Advise, assist, and evacuate. Stay in touch with your team leaders who are undergoing a crisis. Jake and I were in constant contact in France. I was in constant texting contact with my Romania team over 2.5 days. I was really grouchy because I was working all day and then working the texting all night, and my wife was like, man, you need a day off to sleep. You're grouchy. But know where people are. Control and analyze. Make sure your controls are in place to ensure compliance, and always review data for maximum effectiveness and efficiency. So those are some really broad, fast, sweeping overviews of duty of care. We do actually have a good duty of care model in Scripture. This is an idea I was introduced by my friend Scott Bronner with Concilium, the idea of the Good Samaritan as a good duty of care model. All of you are familiar with the story. A man was on the road. He was attacked by robbers. He was passed by 2 or 3 different Jewish people who left him there. The victim was Jewish. And then we pick it up in Luke in verse 33. But a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him. And when he saw him, he felt compassion and came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? And he said, the one who showed mercy toward him. Then Jesus said to him, go and do the same. Now, as I'm sure you all know, the point of the Good Samaritan is not a duty of care model. It's how to love your neighbor. But I think in order for us to love our neighbor well, we do have to practice good duty of care. And we see many of the things that we've just talked about done in this passage. The Good Samaritan had to have assessed the risk on the road to prepare to address the bloody man. He had to know there's a risk of robbers in order to have bandages to care for wounds. He planned ahead. I may need extra money. Who knows what's coming? He planned strategically. He knew the risks and he prepared to address the attack, both in his heart and in his skills. He had compassion for the victim and medical supplies of the day on hand. The Samaritan and the Jew hated each other. The Samaritans are the half-breed Jew Canaanite blend that worshiped God, but on a different hill. They were cousins that hated each other. So it's really striking that a Samaritan would stop and help a Jew. But obviously he prepared in his heart to just help people. He developed policies and procedures. He was prepared to address the health and safety and security of other travelers by having medical supplies on hand. He had managed his global mobility, in that he'd studied the route and knew what he could potentially encounter there. He had trained in first aid. He advised, assisted, and evacuated the victim. He helped him and then took him to the inn. So we can see a good duty of care model there. He planned ahead, he prepared his heart, he learned skills, he prepared for several contingencies, he provided aftercare. I'm just really encouraged by that, and that's really stuck with me since Scott taught it. Your theology of risk and duty of care is not a theology of safety and security. It really is part of your overall theology of stewardship. It's being the best possible stewards of the people that God has entrusted to your care. And it's all about being prepared. I've had a couple different missionaries tell me the things that I bring to them and talk to them about are rooted in fear. And it's not rooted in fear. It's rooted in preparedness. I really doubt that many of the risks that we have prepared our missionaries for are things they will encounter. But I do believe that should the Lord have it for them to encounter that, they need to be prepared to respond so that they're able to be an excellent testimony to the grace of God in their lives and in the lives of the church. Okay, so those are kind of the big picture theory ideas. Let me move into what we actually do, how I actually spend my day here at the church with short-term cross-cultural worker security, which is just a really big mouthful that doesn't fit very well on a business card. Our short-term security program is based around of these 5 things. I write risk assessments for all of our short-term trips that go out. I require all of my short-term travelers to go through the sexual abuse awareness training that Greg Love talked about earlier. I send them all through a personal security training that I've developed. We provide go bags for all of our short-term teams, and we also have developed a crisis management team and protocol that by God's grace we've not had to pull the trigger and activate yet. So that's kind of the broad overview. I spend most of my efforts developing risk assessments. If you do nothing else, if your church can't do anything other than do a risk assessment, anything other than this, do this. Go to travel.state.gov and look at the risk advisory for your country of destination. In 2018, U.S. State Department revised their travel advisory system. Prior to 2018, they wrote advisories for countries that had problems. In 2018, they completely restructured, and now they write advisories for every country in the world. And they've assigned them one of 4 levels. Level 1, which is blue, are exercise normal caution. It's an okay place to be. It's like being in the United States. Countries that are level 1 are the United States, Canada, Romania is also level 1. You don't need to worry too much about stuff there. Level 2 is exercise increased caution. That's yellow. You need to pay a little bit more attention because of one of several reasons. Level 2, or the metrics they use to assign the levels, include crime, terrorism, civil unrest, health issues, natural disaster, a time-limited event like an election, some other reason, kidnapping or hostage taking. The travel advisors will tell you the risk level and tell you which one of those reasons I just listed have led to that advisory level. So level 2 is exercise increased caution. That's most of the places that my long-term travelers live. France, the United Kingdom, Spain, countries like that are in level 2. Level 3 is reconsider travel. They're not saying don't go, but they want you to really think about it. The U.S. government has not pulled their people but it's really not necessarily prudent for you to go there if you don't have to. Countries that are level 3 are Russia, particular states in Mexico, places like that. Level 4, big bright red stop sign, do not travel. Often the U.S. government has either pulled non-essential personnel or just doesn't even have any diplomatic relations. That's like North Korea, Syria, other parts of Mexico. So I will tell our teams that are going what the advisory level is there. I write a risk assessment that addresses the advisory level and its indicators. I provide information on passport, visa, vaccination, and currency requirements for entering the country. If you don't do those 3 or 4 things, it's risky to try to go into the country because they send you away, so we address it there. We talk about in-country travel and transportation. I talk about safety and security issues that are known, including cybersecurity threats or ATM skimming threats or robbery, things of that nature. We do talk about health issues, including disease and vaccination requirements. We have a team going to Uganda. In June, there were 3 Ebola patients that showed up in Uganda, so I became obligated to communicate that to our short-term team. I will then also explain some mitigating factors over the risks. The Ebola patients, there were 3 of them, a grandmother and 2 sons. One of the sons has died. All of that occurred 357 miles away from where my team will be. I also know that the Ugandan government has vaccinated over 1,400 healthcare workers and established Ebola-specific health clinics throughout the country. And in the 2014 Ebola outbreak in Western Africa, everyone looked at Uganda as the way to respond appropriately to Ebola. So I communicate that to them so they understand, okay, don't need to be scared that when I go to Uganda, I'm automatically going to get Ebola. Because they might think that. We also, in vaccinations in general, we understand that vaccinations are a very personal decision in our country, particularly in some of our faith traditions. So we at Denton Bible Church do not require vaccinations of you to go on a short-term team unless it's required for you to cross the border into the country. That's a different story. If you can't go into Uganda without a yellow fever vaccination, we're going to tell you that, and you're going to go get a yellow fever vaccination. But if they go read the World Health Organization or CDC and they see the list of other 15 vaccinations that are recommended, that's between you and your healthcare provider to decide, and I won't reimburse that as part of your support-raised monies. So we do talk about that as kind of stuff as well. We do enroll everybody in the short-term traveler enrollment program, basically telling the State Department our people are there. So if something goes bad, the U.S. government knows they're there, and they also can email my team members if the government's telling them something is happening. We also belong to a couple different professional organizations. OSAC is the Overseas Security Advisory Council within the U.S. Department of State. It's a public-private partnership between the U.S. government to protect U.S. citizens living and working abroad. And we're active constituent members of that. Any of us that have some sort of international travel work component can join that. In addition, we're a part of a working group within OSAC called the Faith-Based Organization Working Group. That group is comprised of faith-based organizations that may or may not align with us theologically, but have very similar conversations as we do. And we belong to that, and that allows us to network with other people if we have a crisis. We also are active members of the Risk Management Network, which is a specifically evangelical missions security director organization that does share theological positions with us, that we are really all there, all out about Jesus. That's why we go. Between those three things, I have access to lots of information. That's where I met Scott Stewart. That's where I met Jonathan Verhoeven with Concilium, who's out in the hallway. Did I just break a rule in saying that? I hope not. Anyway, don't tell anybody. That's Chatham House rules, which means you can't say what I just said. I learned that too. That's a fun thing. That's a cool party trick to introduce words like that. Okay, yeah, I'll keep talking. Other open sources for my risk assessments are listed here. I do look at the 5 I's, which is the state departments of the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. I do have some known trusted news sources, news agencies publicly available that I'll read, like France 24 and Africa News. I do also follow Scott Bronner and Concilium and CCI and some other people that I know and trust that can give me information about what's going on the ground. I will prepare the risk assessment that looks like that, and I do not expect you to read that, but it looks like that. I'll present that to our team at their first or second meeting so that they have an opportunity to make decisions about the risks they face and if they want to still go on the trip. Broadly, that shows the 4 levels of travel advisory. I want them to understand what they're looking at. It gives the level. It explains the risk indicators used. It provides just some quick facts about traveling to that country, discusses travel and transportation issues, safety and security issues, health and vaccination issues, and then it also provides them the embassy information so that they can leave that with their parents or whoever, their family, as they travel in case something goes wrong. Another part that we do in preparation is the child safety training. I won't talk about that very much. Greg talked about it for 2 hours. I don't need to explain what we do or explain the training. But here at Denton Bible Church, any employee completes that training and any volunteer serving in a child serving ministry. And we look at that very broadly. If the ministry that you do is going to involve children directly or potentially, we're going to require that you do SAT training. Because on a short-term mission trip, you never know when if you're going to be asked to teach Sunday school or babysit for a prayer meeting. We require every short-term traveler to complete the SAT training. And I check that status and I make sure that the folks in missions know which team members still have to do it and communicate with them until it's all taken. About 2 weeks before they leave, I will provide a personal security training. That training is framed around the arc of denial, deliberation, and decision from Amanda's Ripley, The Unthinkable, Who Survives When Disaster Strikes and Why. In that book, Ripley suggests that the people that can move through that arc fastest are the people that are most likely to survive when something happens. So we are trying to get them past the denial that won't happen to me on my trip so that they can deliberate about what I'm going to do should something happen. So when that actually happens, they've already decided what they're going to do so that they are more likely to survive. That training also discusses the brief theology of risk that all of you heard. We talk about before, during, and after travel. I give special attention to the hotel and transportation safety issues, talking about which hotel floor they should get a room on and why, encouraging them to walk the hotel, count the number of steps between their room and the fire exit, the number of stairs from their floor down to the ground, to actually go make sure that the door at the base of the fire exit isn't chained shut, because sometimes that happens in other parts of the world. We talk about the benefits of traveling gray using a paper written by Scott Stewart, teaching them just to blend in and not stick out. not just for security reasons, but also for cultural sensitivity reasons. You don't need to let your demeanor and your clothing get in the way of your safety or the gospel message. So we talk about that. And then we also talk about the attack cycle. I use a 4-part model. Scott used a 7-part. Really, my point in that is just for people to know that that cycle occurs in attacks, just to educate them that happens. So that's everything that we do in advance. When we actually send a team, we have a go bag that we have prepared. That go bag is identical to the go bags we have for our long-term missionaries. That go bag includes a Garmin InReach. If you're not familiar with that, it's a device that's marketed here in the States to mountain climbers and travel enthusiasts. And it's a way that you can text and get a map up on the top of the mountain and still communicate with people. So if your cell service goes down, they still have a way to text and talk to us. Our go bags include a wide variety of items for a very wide variety of crises. We tried to have 2 different solutions to every crisis or problem that we identified. For example, we have 2 different ways to start fire if you need to. We have 2 different compasses. We have 2 different emergency whistles. We have 2 different water purification systems. We have a solar charger with all the appropriate cords for a variety of devices if you need that. We have emergency blankets, 1 per family member, 1 per team. We have smoke hoods. We have Israeli bandages. We have chest compression kits. We have our Air Force survival knives. Things that really make most of our folks get really bug-eyed when I'm showing it to them. Last year I had the real fun pleasure of taking 5 and 6 and 7 iterations of those things from the United States to the field. And it's really kind of surreal to walk into the airport with 6 different bags, 50 pounds each, and you know in one of those bags is 7 Air Force survival knives, and you're going to have to explain what that is maybe. So I made sure that my boss carried that bag, so he had to answer the questions. I carried the nice things like the life straws and the first aid kits, the other first aid kit, all the safe, easy things. We do recognize that some of those items do not need to cross the border into particular countries. For example, the survival knife does not go to Argentina because our resident Argentinians say if we try to take that across the border, even as people that live here, they're going to stop us and it'll take time and money to get that out. So that we just leave that here. This next slide actually is a list of all of the products we have in it and where I purchased them. That's really there just to show you the diversity of things we have and want you to know that they were all purchased almost exclusively at Amazon.com. It was really fun to have 45 Garmin InReach bundles delivered to the church. I mean, 45 sets of all of that came delivered to me at the church, and it just lined every hallway in our administration suite for a week because it came while I was on vacation. They were real happy with me. You will get this slide, so that's all there. I do actually have the box I used to train here. If any of you want to look at it, it's out. We can walk through it at break out. I want a starting point, but none of you know what that is. At the counter just outside here. So I just want you to know that's what's in it. And the last thing that I've done since I started in this role is help develop crisis management policies. I've been to crisis management training with CCI, Crisis Consulting International. My first week on the job, I went to a training and I almost quit. Instead, I went on 2 weeks vacation after that and kind of decompressed and changed my mind. But we used that training to develop our policy. What we do if something happens, we have tabletop exercise that plan a couple different times. We need to do another one. We create a crisis management team that have representatives from church administration, our elders, our missions department, and safety and security. And like I said, we also do some tabletop exercises so that we have experience in that crisis management before it actually happens. I remember the training in Georgia that I went to. My boss said, "Joe, you're in charge of the team that we're working on here." I was all prepared to be the note taker because that's what I've done several times here at the church. I'm the minutes taker at meetings. So I was all prepared for that. That's in my wheelhouse. And Pat says, "Oh no, Joe, you're going to run. You're the crisis management leader for this." Like, okay. Well, I don't know what to do. But I remember the distinct feeling during that process, feeling like I need to be doing something. The exercise is going on, we're waiting for the communication from the facilitators, and I remember just this feeling of, I need to be doing something, oh my goodness. But we have people, and I need to be doing something. And that's part of the tabletop exercise. I know that when a crisis happens, I'm going to feel frustrated because I know there's something to do, but I don't know what that is. So now that I've experienced that, I'm better able to handle that and address that should a crisis come. So I can't talk about scenario-based training and tabletop exercises enough. If you are a church that is sending people across the world, there are a number of organizations that can help train you in these things, help you write these things. You can visit with the folks at Concilium, they can do that. You can talk to me about some others if you want that. But do it. So that's all I have today. I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Anyone have a question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Joe, once you do a risk analysis, you brief the team.
Oh, Chuck's bringing you a microphone. Embrace the microphone. Don't fear the microphone.
Once you do a risk analysis and brief short-term, probably team, who makes the call on go or don't go?
Here at Denton Bible Church, it would be a conversation between actually everyone on the crisis management team, our safety and security folks, our missions folks, our elders, and our administration folks. Some of those voices are louder than others, but all those people would be engaged. And it really is, when we're facing a question, we really will just kind of get together and sit down, talk through all the problems, all the risks, all the threats, and think about who's on the team. Is this team made of experienced travelers, or is it a whole bunch of first-timers? What is the nature of the risk? Ultimately, in our church structure, it's the elders that will make a final decision. If administration, missions, and security can't agree, we kick it up to the elders, and they can decide. Do you agree with that, Corey? Is that right? Okay. Corey, our sound man, is in our missions department, so he's checking to make sure I'm correct. Yes, ma'am? Wait for the microphone.
I don't need it.
Well, but yes, other people can't hear.
Even that?
We're all getting less young.
Okay, I was going to ask you, all those things listed on that, basically some of this first responder information or how to use a parachute, you train all of those people on all those things, and how to put a straw in so they can breathe it. I mean, they cut the right.
I have never trained someone to do a tracheotomy, but I have seen it done on MASH, so I know how to do it. I'm just kidding. No, no one's ever asked me that, but we have, like the chest compression thing that we have, instructions are printed on it for them to watch. We have lots of folks who are nurses and deployed in the field. So yes and no is probably the best.
I know a lady who's a missionary goes all the time for stuff like that, but she sees blood, she faints.
Yeah. I have some of those too here. So, like I said, hopefully we don't ever use 98% of that, but
You know, Joe, one of our, in our training, we ask people what kind of martial arts have you had, anything? Typical answers, oh, I've not had any, but I watched Kung Fu Panda 1, 2, and 3.
oh yes, yes sir.
You geared this towards overseas mission trips.
Uh-huh.
You have an abbreviated that you use for in the States here? Because small churches
Sure.
sends people out to different states or even
Well,
close communities.
Now, as we do that as well. We actually have a team in Tennessee right now. I don't write a risk assessment here in the States because we're staying in our culture. So it's a little bit easier for us just to naturally identify threats in a way it's not cross-culturally. I've not learned tools to do them domestically yet, but I'll get there. Excuse me as I scratch my eye.
Did you do language training for Tennessee?
No, but we send our best Texan. But we will send a go bag with them because they can still use the Band-Aids and all of that. So it is a modified. I should say this process is only about 2 years old, and we've been sending people as long as I've been here. So it's still new and developing. So just because I don't today doesn't mean that I won't in a year. I'm giving myself lots of time since I have a witness in Corey Newman. Any other questions for me?
All right, thank you, Joe.
Thank y'all.